The next item on the agenda is now a series of statements from Council and Commission on the Enlargement Report for Turkey. Let me start by giving the floor to Council and in the person of Minister Vammen. Go ahead, sir.
Madam President, honourable members, Commissioner. On behalf of the Danish Presidency, I would like to thank Parliament and in particular Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten for her work. The motion for resolution highlights a number of significant issues and concerns and comes to an important point in EU-Turkey relations. Turkey is more to Europe than a candidate country. It is also an essential strategic ally playing a key regional role. As such, it has a privileged relationship with a number of crucial actors in the region. Turkey is also an important and growing economic player. Turkey and the EU have an obvious mutual interest in upholding strong ties with each other. Only in this way can we contribute to contain and overcome tensions in our neighbouring regions. The EU-Turkey relationship is a close one and goes back several decades. This clearly illustrates not only our many shared interests, it also demonstrates the power of the enlargement process to give impetus to political and economic reform in Turkey. We can all see that the accession negotiations are not advancing as quickly as we would like. However, if the opportunity arises for progress in negotiations, the Danish Presidency stands ready to seize it. We will do our utmost to facilitate progress, but needless to say, this will require additional significant efforts from the Turkish side. We will also act in support of the Commission's positive agenda. We must not lose sight of Turkey's and EU's mutual interest in deepening our relations in spite of the challenges in the formal accession talks. It is clear that the positive agenda should be a complement to the negotiations and not a substitute for them. As stated by the Council last December, Turkey's contribution to the EU will only be fully effective in the context of an actual negotiation process that makes progress. Work on the actual content of this agenda is still at an early stage, but we are following and supporting developments with great interest. As far as the reforms in Turkey is concerned, I will begin with a few words about constitutional reform, and preparing a new constitution is now well underway. The process is an opportunity to address a number of important issues. It has to take place in a broad and inclusive way and in a spirit of constructiveness and compromise. We very much welcome initial steps towards ensuring this. Much of the work on this key reform is of direct relevance for the enlargement negotiations with Turkey. While constitutional reform is important, further progress by Turkey in other areas is required. As noted both in your resolution and in the Council conclusions of December, some very important issues have to be addressed. But further progress is needed on issues such as fundamental rights and freedoms. I would especially like to highlight freedom of expression. We have witnessed a large number of cases brought against writers and journalists. And although we have witnessed some positive development, such as the recent liberation from prison of 4 journalists, the high number of cases against writers and journalists raise serious concerns which need to be addressed. Let me now turn to the one unresolved issue which has a direct bearing on both the negotiations and more widely on EU-Turkey relations. The Council notes with deep regret that Turkey, despite our repeated calls, so far has failed to fulfil its obligation under the additional protocol to the association agreement. The EU position on this has not changed, and in the absence of progress, full non-discriminatory implementation of the protocol, the EU will maintain its measures from 2006, which will continue to affect overall progress in the negotiations. We also continue to expect Turkey to make progress toward normalising its relations with the Republic of Cyprus without further delay. I would like to recall that the Council has a regretted statement by Turkey threatening to freeze relations with the EU presidency during the second half of this year. The rotating presidency is a fundamental institutional feature of the EU provided for in the EU Treaty and must be fully respected, a position which I know is also included in your resolutions. President, honourable members, Commissioner, in conclusion, the aim of the presidency is to do our utmost to facilitate progress in the enlargement negotiations, to promote political and economic reform in Turkey, and to strengthen the relationship between EU and Turkey. This is a task that we can only realise with the support and cooperation of Member States, the Commission, and not least this Parliament. And let me also, on behalf of the Danish Presidency and the Member States, thank this Parliament, in particular your Rapporteur, Oomen-Ruijten, for your work on this issue. Your continued commitment to enlargement is vital to its success, as is, of course, your particular role in promoting popular support in the EU for this cause. The resolution on Turkey and its endorsement in the plenary is indeed a forceful political and strategic message. I also believe that in contacts with fellow parliamentarians from the Turkish Parliament, this House will be able to make an important and much appreciated contribution to enhancing understanding of the EU, the values that we share, and the way we work. Madam President, thank you.
Grazie, Ministro.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now we turn to Commissioner Fule.
Madam President, honourable members, Minister, I would like to thank the Parliament and in particular and with special appreciation Ms. Oomen-Ruijten for her good and balanced report on Turkey. This debate and your resolution come at an important time for European Union-Turkey relations, and the draft resolution underlines a number of issues of great importance for the Commission. Last Friday, High Representative and Vice President of the Commission, Cathy Ashton, and I met Ministers Davutoglu and Bahish, and we had a very positive and open political dialogue. Once again, I realized that we have much more in common at strategic level than we have differences. We discussed our ever closer foreign policy dialogue and progress related to the political criteria, and in particular agreed to work concretely and constructively to make the positive agenda a reality. The positive agenda is there to provide a realistic and feasible way to inject new life into EU-Turkey relations in general and into the accession process in particular. And I wish to thank you for your support as expressed in the resolution we discussed today. Let me emphasize again that this agenda is to complement and not to replace the accession process. The positive agenda means renewed efforts in a number of key areas, including the support for political reforms in Turkey, such as the alignment with our acquis, a closer cooperation on visa, migration, and a closer dialogue on foreign policy. All are underlined in your resolution. I'm happy to tell you that since the Member States endorsed the positive agenda last December, we have made a very good progress in putting it into practice. The Commission and Turkey have agreed to work on 8 chapters, including the chapters on company law, on information society, and media, on judiciary and fundamental rights, and on justice, freedom and security. We have also agreed to work on bringing the relevant Turkish legislation closer in line with the European Union acquis. Working groups will be set up for each chapter in May-June. The Commission services will use kick-off meetings to update Turkish authorities on all developments regarding the acquis. And of course, we will involve stakeholders as appropriate at further stages of the process. Work continues also in other areas of the positive agenda. As regards energy, for instance, Turkey and the Commission have agreed to set up a joint working group which will develop a roadmap by May to identify the concrete actions for intensified cooperation. Turning now briefly to some recent developments in Turkey which are also reflected in your resolution. I have welcomed the overall consensus on the need for a new constitution, which emerged after the general elections last June. The concrete work launched by the Turkish Parliament to bring this process forward, including a constructive collaboration of the four main political parties, has started. Obviously, the real test will come with the first discussion on the substance. Consensus through a democratic, participatory process with the broadest possible consultation is essential if this new constitution is to serve all Turkish citizens. Let me in this context also explicitly refer to the conclusions of the most recent reform monitoring group held in Istanbul on 16 March. These conclusions list a large number of political reforms already underway or foreseen in the near future by the Turkish government. I would like to single out the intention to table a fourth judicial reform package which foresees further reforms in the area of freedom of expression and the media. We hope that this package will address the outstanding core concern as regards freedom of expression and the right to a fair trial. These issues are rightly underlined as persistent concerns in the resolution you intend to adopt later. We hope that our cooperation with Turkey on these issues, notably as part of the positive agenda, will bring badly needed improvements in legislation and practice. We will report in 2012 progress report on developments in trials and investigations of alleged criminal networks, as we have done over the past years and as expressly requested in your resolution. Let me, in closing, take this opportunity to raise the concerns that civil society in Turkey is increasingly voicing as regards recent developments related to freedom of expression. Freedom of expression is intimately linked to the political debate in a country, and thus to the quality and maturity of a democracy. In a mature democracy, the majority respects and protects minority views and their rights. In a mature democracy, dissenting voices are not ridiculed or pushed into a self-censorship, but valued for their contribution to the democratic fabric of society. In words of Voltaire, we can disapprove of what someone says, but we need to defend to the death his or her right to say it. If this right is not defended, democracy inevitably withers. Honourable members, the resolution of this House gives a fair assessment of the important challenges that Turkey is taking on in the area of judiciary and fundamental rights. On a major domestic political debate, with full respect for dissenting voices, will ensure that these reforms deliver the democratic standards and practices the citizens of Turkey expect and deserve. Thank you.
Grazie, Commissario.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now we come on to political group spokesmen, and we begin with the EPP and Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten, who has 3 minutes, please.
That's work, yeah. Madam President, dear colleagues, first of all I would like to thank Mr. Wammen but also Commissioner Fule for their warm words of support for the resolution. We have such a balanced resolution because we did it all together, so also thanks to all the shadow rapporteurs. Dear colleagues, we want to convey in this resolution the message of interdependence between the EU and Turkey. Turkey is a key country for the security and prosperity of the European Union. Turkey has an enormous potential for economic growth, and it has a strategic role as a corridor for European Union's energy supply. And complemented by the value of potential synergies between the EU and Turkey, the foreign policy and security policy can do a lot for us both. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe, however, that interdependence can only produce positive results when it is framed in a context of mutual commitment. And this requires efforts from both sides. For Turkey, this means concrete results in the reform process and also an improvement in bilateral relations with its neighbours. From the EU and its member states, I may expect renewed efforts to create the conditions for opening of chapters. And Mr. Fule, I fully support your new positive agenda for EU-Turkey relations. It was initiated by you and we support it. It's now true that we must increase our cooperation, but that also means that we must have more coordination in areas like foreign policy and fight against terrorism. There's much to gain for both of us. This resolution expresses our concern about the freedoms, the deterioration of the press freedom and the freedom of expression in Turkey. And I just met Mr. Ahmet Sik, who is with 3 colleagues just released from prison. He was here to visit us in the Parliament. What is happening in Turkey is that there is a too long pre-trial detention. There is a too broad legislation on terror, and that sort of things don't fit in a country which should have an independent and all over impartial justice. Because with the long pre-detention, it's de facto a punishment what is happening now. So I ask my colleagues to look over that. Then the bilateral relations. The bilateral relations are continuing to affect deeply the process of negotiations. I call on the government to do something, to come up with positive steps. Mrs. President, it's not only negative elements which we report in this resolution. We also highlight positive developments. And what I would like to stress once again is that we fully support the Parliament of Turkey in their obligations to come up with a new constitution with checks and balances which are important for a modern and prosperous Turkey. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On behalf of the S&D Group, Mr. Obiols, for 2 minutes, please.
President, our group believes that this draft resolution is clear and it's balanced. It was adopted by a large majority in the committee, and this sends out a very good signal. Very, very good work was done whereby Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten, and everything really is very positive indeed. This contributes towards further improvements between the relations of the EU and Turkey. However, let's not forget that we have encountered difficulties in terms of making further headway with the negotiations between the EU and Turkey. There have been all these changes in the Mediterranean and in the Middle East, and let's not forget this context. Now, with this backdrop, the Commissioner's positive agenda, not as a replacement for the accession negotiations, but as a vehicle for further improving bilateral relations, should be something that we support. So to sum up, this report does bring up some positive elements, yet at the same time it fulfills our duty to point out some of the shortcomings that exist in the country. We support the positive agenda. We call for further chapters to be opened up in the negotiations. We call for the defence and upholding of media freedom. We speak out against the abuse of anti-terrorism laws and the imprisonment of politicians, activists and journalists. And on the whole, I believe that this will contribute towards positive changes with regard to EU-Turkey relations. I'd like to congratulate the Rapporteur for her very good work. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. On behalf of the ALDE Group, Mr. Duff, 2 minutes, please.
Strongly supports the report, and I agree that it is possible to be positive, but it is impossible to be optimistic. Turkey seems distracted by the other pressing priorities that it faces. Europe is clearly not ready to progress the accession process. And the central problem is Cyprus. And because Cyprus is shortly to be the president of the Council, I think it's appropriate for us to spotlight that problem. Nothing could be more intelligent and strategic than for the Cypriot presidency to call the bluff of Turkey and to open chapters 23 and 24 on rights and justice. Such a move would not be about power and pride and prejudice, but about the people, about Greeks and Turks, Christians and Muslims, who could then look forward to a period of reconciliation where they could live together in freedom, security and justice. I strongly insist that the Cypriot presidency of the Council should be made aware of its responsibilities. Thank you.
Grazie per il gruppo.
Thank you. On behalf of the Green Group, Mrs. Flotre, for 3.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I really would like to congratulate the Rapporteur, Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten, on this report. It really is a very inclusive report. I think that all in all, this sends out an appeal and supports democratic reform and protection of fundamental rights in Turkey. And I think that the messages that it sends out are very clear and precise. And they are, of course, addressed to the authorities, but of course to all of those working in the political sphere and in civil society to ensure that they get stuck into the protection of democracy in Turkey. We have expressed our grave concerns about the application of the law against terrorism, freedom of expression, right to demonstrate, freedom of the press, etc. And we are calling for a change in the law, particularly Articles 6 and 7 thereof. We also call for thorough reform of the judiciary. All citizens in Turkey must be able to have faith in an efficient, impartial and independent legal system, and we support all the reforms that would move in that direction. We also tackle the Kurdish issue, and we think that education in your mother tongue is something that ought to be available and would be a good way to politically address the Kurdish issue, and not just from a security point of view. I think these messages would be all the more credible if we get consistency in our approach with that of the Council, and the European Union needs to be able to reference Turkey's reforms and also to give them further impetus, and we want every potential measure to be taken to open chapters 23 and chapter 4. Also on visas. We need a roadmap for liberalisation of visas, because a country which is trying to accede to the European Union finds itself in a unique situation and is discriminated against as a result. This is an important message. We want it to be picked up on Turkey, and we don't want this excellent report to fall on deaf ears. We want to ensure that it isn't watered down or weakened by any statements that may be appended to it. It's important that the secular independence of the army is upheld, and for many years efforts have been made to give the army, to put the army back under civil control, to make sure that the military is held to account, and the secular aspect of the army, which goes right back to 1952, one of the biggest armies in NATO, is one which must have its secular status confirmed. This is what we want for Turkey, and this is something which all of us together must try and achieve. I don't think it would be a good thing to cast any doubt. The Court of Human Rights said in December in a ruling that there are cases which are well founded for where arrests for criminal acts were not deemed acceptable by the European Court of Human Rights. We don't wish to have any of those cases called into question. So we've got these references. We want this to reach as wide as possible an audience across all sectors of Turkish society and its political arena. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Now on behalf of the ECR Group, Mr Van Orden, you have a minute and a half.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Well, first of all, can I join congratulations to Ria Oomen-Ruijten. It's a good report. Of course, there are many aspects of the report which we might have liked to see worded in a rather different way. And I appreciate that there are strong feelings on the subject of Turkey on all sides of the House. I mean, for my part, I've always been supportive of Turkish aspirations towards the European Union, and I'm particularly appreciative of Turkey's role as a key ally over the years. But I have to ask, Madam Chairman, is the European Union being helpful enough? Is it sending a really positive message to Turkey? In particular, we see consistent obstruction from certain rather obvious quarters regarding Turkey's European aspirations and status. This is unrealistic, it's unjust, and it prevents progress. We make demands of Turkey, but we should reciprocate with movement in Turkey's direction. For example, Cyprus, which my good friend and colleague Mr. Duff has mentioned. This shouldn't feature in Turkey's accession, but we all know that it is in fact a factor. There are constant demands for Turkey to make unilateral concessions, and in return she gets nothing. The EU is supposed to have ended the isolation of northern Cyprus. Whatever happened to that? By all means call for reductions in Turkish troop numbers in the north of Cyprus and for agreement to the additional protocol. But match this with opening trade through the ports and airports in northern Cyprus. I have to say that the EU presidency of the Republic of Cyprus in the second half of this year would present a great opportunity for progress if there was real courage. If there is a genuine desire to reunite the island of Cyprus, then the Turkish Cypriots need to feel they're actually welcome and respected in the island that they share. I have to say, Madam Chairman, we regret that some unhelpful amendments have been tabled to the report, but overall the report is balanced and reasonable, and the ECR group will support it. Thank you.
Mr. Van Orden, do you accept a blue card from Mr. Dartmouth?
Mr. Van Orden, you used the phrase Turkey is a key ally. Do you accept that a country can be a key ally without political union?
Madam Chairman, as my good friend and colleague knows full well, I'm not overly enthusiastic about many aspects of the European Union, in particular political integration. But the fact is that Turkey does have an aspiration towards joining the European Union, and I think Turkey's strategic position is a very important one. Turkey has been an excellent ally for very many years, and we therefore need to meet her aspirations in a positive way. I have always said, if we send negative signals to Turkey, we should not be surprised if she starts heading off in a rather different direction. And once or twice in the recent months and years, there have been one or two little indications that maybe there were feelers going out in different directions. And we have to be very careful about that. So I would say that by all means Turkey can be a good ally without being in the Union, of course, because that is the situation at the moment. But we need to meet Turkey's aspirations. And what she wishes is for accession to the European Union. But I hope that by the time that happens, which I hope will not be in too many decades distant, by the time that happens, we will be talking about a very different European Union to the one that we have now, and a European Union that's heading in rather different direction to the one that it's heading in at the moment.
Another blue card from Mr. Posselt. Do you accept? Yes. So please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Mr. Van Orden, you know that there are those who are vehemently against Turkey's accession to the EU, and if Turkey joins the EU will become something very different. But what would the EU become if Turkey joined? What's your view?
Well, I'm delighted you've asked that, because there are certain members who ascribe mischievous intentions in my support for Turkey. I would have to say that the whole question of the impact of Turkey on the European Union is not one of the major factors as to why we should be supporting the European Union accession by Turkey. It is true that the European Union would inevitably be very different with a country like Turkey as a member there. But as I say, I hope by the time that comes about, already the European Union will be very different to what it is today. The European Union needs to get away from this course of insistence and obsession with political integration. And what we need is a European Union of overlapping circles of engagement. where those that want to push forward with intense integration, by all means let them. But others could be part of that union, including perhaps my own country, without having to be intimately involved in that particular movement. So I hope it will be a very different European Union when Turkey joins, and Turkey will help that process.
There is another blue card from Mr. Mavro Nikolaos. Please.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam President. There is a report on Turkey, it's the progress report on Turkey, and it does not really refer to Cyprus. It's not mentioned. So because obviously the subject of the report is Turkey, not Cyprus. So what about the 200,000 citizens who are resident in that part of the island? Are they going to be sort of Turkified, as it were?
I rather missed the point, because actually Cyprus is referred to significantly in a number of paragraphs of the report. So clearly you haven't read it very carefully. And I would ask you to read it carefully, because it's very important that we get it right. There are references to Cyprus, and indeed there are references to the additional protocol. But on the other hand, it is saying that we should open ports as well. That's why I say it is a balanced report. There are many references to Cyprus in the report, and I commend it to your reading.
The last one, blue card. Do you accept the last one? Okay. Madame Papadopoulou.
Κύριε Van Orden, έχετε πει ότι η γνωστή...
Thank you, Mr. Van Orden. You said that development is blocked in terms of Turkey's access or adhesion. But you said some countries are blocking it. What countries are you referring to with that remark? Then you talked about unilateral concessions. But I don't think Turkey has actually made any. It still is not recognising Cyprus.
Madam Chair, well, when I spoke, I was trying to be polite without referring to particular countries, but I seem to recall that in May 2004, early in May, there was, or in fact in April 2004, the European Union agreed that the isolation of northern Cyprus should be ended. A few weeks later, the Republic of Cyprus joined the European Union, and suddenly all that went off the agenda. Now, whether this was coincidental, I don't know. I sometimes get the impression that some of my very good friends and colleagues from Greece and from the Republic of Cyprus are not as helpful as they might be. And when we talk about unilateral concessions, all the time we're making demands of Turkey. But it takes two to tango, you know, and we've got to see some movement on the other side. And Turkish friends say to me, when we make concessions, we never get anything in return. Or when we offer to make concessions, we never get anything offered in return. So I would say, open up northern Cyprus, free the ports there, give them international access, and then some of these other things might start flowing into place.
Mr. Howitt, point of order.
President, I wonder if you could ensure the smooth functioning of Parliament and the proper allocation of political priorities by, at the next part session, allocating on the agenda a full 60 minutes of question time to Mr Van Orden, because I enjoyed that last session so greatly.
Support from a colleague in my own region of the United Kingdom, albeit from another political party. Thank you, Richard.
Avete ragione, andiamo.
You're quite right. Let's move on. Next speaker is Mr. Hadjigeorgiou for 2 minutes for the United Left.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. It is true that the debate that we've had so far has actually meant that I may have to change some of my comments. It is a shame that we can't have longer, but on this part of the point on northern Cyprus, I myself have waged quite a fight in support of the Turkish Cypriots. And I don't know whether maybe I've made more of an effort than he has, but we know what the truth of the situation is. There are thousands of soldiers present in Cyprus, and of course they do impose their will on the Turkish Cypriots. There are 40,000 soldiers and 100,000 inhabitants. So practically in every single household, you've got one soldier per household practically. And obviously, yes, we have to defend the interests of the Turkish Cypriots. Now, we know that yesterday there was an event staged by my own group, and very many Turkish Cypriots came along to that event. There were trade union representatives, and if you'd come along to that meeting, you would have heard, the complaints of those Turkish Cypriots protesting about the presence of the 40,000 soldiers where they live and their continued presence in Cyprus. The Turkish Cypriots are victims of this occupation to a greater extent perhaps than the Greek Cypriots. We know that Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten has made considerable efforts when drafting this progress report, but we feel that the progress report reflects a certain kind of political balance, and I don't think that we can just limit ourselves to mention the problems that are being faced by the Kurdish community in Turkey. What about the problems being faced by the Turkish Cypriots? Why should we not try and deal with everybody equally? And then, of course, there is a further problem of concern to the Turkish Cypriot community relating to the occupation of Turkey. Now, I know, of course, that everybody has their opinion, but I think the problems faced by these people are the fault of Turkey. Now, we have already said that we can support accession of Turkey, and we've already given our support to the initiation of accession negotiations of Turkey. And that was a critical moment, a historical moment. Cyprus gave the green light, but obviously Turkey has to meet certain requirements.
Georgiou, do you accept a blue card? Please.
Can I ask my good colleague Takis Georgiou, who is from the AKEL party, which is the centre of the Cypriot government, what does he expect of the presidency of the Council? Does he agree that it is the duty of the presidency of the Council to project the values and principles of the European Union, and to complete that process of integration, which is at present so sadly not applicable to the island of Cyprus?
When Cyprus has the presidency of Council, it will do everything in accordance with the principles of the European Union. And I'd like to remind Mr. Duff, my dear colleague, you said, why isn't Cyprus planning to open any chapters during its presidency? Well, when Turkey shows that it's willing to open some of the chapters, you will see what Cyprus will do. That's not a positive attitude from Turkey that we're expecting. Thank you. Now, on behalf of the EFD, Mr. Belder, 1.5 minutes. Thank you. The totally wrong Turkish, and indeed appalling Turkish commercial with Adolf Hitler shows the situation in Turkey and the presence of anti-Semitism in this candidate country. We have a member of the Turkish Jewish community that I know well, and he wrote to me and said that the passive attitude of the Turkish judiciary to anti-Semitic statements in the Turkish media is unacceptable, and actions of this kind must be punished severely. End of quote. So I expect you, Commissioner, to raise this issue immediately. This is abject anti-Semitism. Turkish leaders are rejecting it using irrational arguments that Islam, according to him, doesn't allow anti-Semitism. Now, my second point, there are 3 urgent action points that the Commission has sent to the Turkish government. One is to allow churches to be built with appropriate procedures. Another is no mention of religion on identity cards because it leads to a lot of discrimination against Turkish Christians. And thirdly, getting rid of optional Islamic religious education because it makes Christian children the butt of jokes by their Turkish Islamic colleagues. Thank you. The non-inscribed Mr. Madlener, 1 minute.
Voorzitter. President. Commissioner Fule, the lover of Islam, and Ria Oomen-Ruijten have completely lost the way. Turkey is going in the wrong direction. Many journalists are in prison and cartoonists are being taken to court. Freedom of expression is being further limited by the further Islamization of the AK party, and we're seeing that the Islamization of Europe via Turkey is increasing all of the time, and the illegal Turkish occupation of part of the EU member state Cyprus has now been going on for more than 35 years. Turkish Minister Baris is threatening to annex northern Cyprus even, and it's really just saber-rattling by Turkey towards Europe, and it's absolutely unacceptable. Every year we have critical reports on Turkey, but this Parliament does nothing. Turkey is even rewarded with more than 500 million euros of taxpayers' money from Europe, and Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten's report is just a joke. There is no sanction being put on Turkey. Now, if the Turks boycott the EU during the Cypriot presidency, well, they should never come back to the negotiating table. Thank you.
Mr. Do you accept the blue card? Yes, please.
De taal van meneer Madlener.
Mr. Madlener's language I'm not going to comment upon, but I do have one question. Does it not say in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that whatever religion you have, that you should treat everyone with respect? Now, if you don't respect at least that basic principle, then you really have lost your way.
Voorzitter, mijn collega.
President, my colleague Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten knows that the PVV wants to resist Islam in Europe. We do not want there to be further Islamization of Europe. There's already enough Islam in Europe, and Turkish membership, which you want to see of the EU, that will mean millions of Turks will be coming to Western Europe, and that will be bad for the Netherlands and bad for your supporters as well.
Bene, continuiamo.
Fine, we'll continue the debate with the next speaker, and that is Mr. Mian Mon, who has 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. When it comes to the accession process of Cyprus to the European Union, of Turkey to the European Union, I'd like to focus on 3 points. Firstly, their visa policy towards nationals of third countries. 2 years ago, I expressed my surprise before this House because Turkey was not doing anything here in this particular policy area. In 2011, in the progress report, it said that Turkey had recently concluded various agreements with Sudan and the Yemen on a visa policy. But it would appear that citizens of Iran, Lebanon and Syria don't need visas to travel to Turkey. One of the main Spanish broadsheets last year pointed out that thousands of miles of borders of Turkey and the fact that you don't have to have a visa to travel means, of course, that the mafia organisations are rowing their hands in glee. Turkey has to bring themselves closer to the European Union when it comes to visa policy. It's part of the acquis, and they should not continue along the path, which is one that is removing them further from the European Union. And there ought to be progressive alignment of their visa policy, and I think the Commission is going to have to keep a very close eye on all of this. Secondly, the European Union and Turkey have to bring their political dialogue closer. We know that Turkey is present in an area which is very close to Europe, undergoing considerable changes, and we have to make sure there's closer negotiations between Ankara and Brussels. I do very much welcome the reforms that have taken place in Turkey, and I would very much hope they continue with the strength and determination that they have shown so far.
Thank you, Ms. Koppa. 1 minute. Thank you. I'd like to congratulate the Rapporteur on an excellent job once again. Turkey is still sending out inconsistent messages, contradictory messages. On the one hand, they are starting up a dialogue for a new constitution, but on the other hand, they are continuing to persecute journalists, activists. We know that more than 200 journalists are still incarcerated, and we've recently heard that a Turkish leader saying a book can be as dangerous as a bomb. Turkey doesn't want to give up on its European vocation, but it is still acting provocatively. For example, it's not doing anything about the Cypriot issue. So if they want to send out the signal that they want to join, there are certain things that they should do. They have stopped certain chapters. There's no progress at all. So the leaders in Ankara have to shoulder their responsibilities. You don't automatically become a member of the European Union. There are commitments that have to be carried out. No backtracking. So we can't go on with this 1 step forward, 2 step back. Thank you, Mr. Kazak. 2 minutes.
Madam President, dear colleagues, dear Commissioner, I would also like to congratulate Mrs. Ruijten on what she has achieved in her report. New elements have been introduced to the report that are rather encouraging. It is very important to underline that Turkey is the only candidate country that has such a stringent visa regime. I welcome our Rapporteur calling on the Council to start a visa dialogue and to set up a roadmap to alleviating the visa regime after Turkey signs the readmission agreement. That will not only enforce our trade and economic relations with Turkey, it is also an important prerequisite for cohesion on the level of citizens. I welcome opening Chapter 24 on internal affairs and justice, as well as opening the chapter on the legal system. If we really want Turkey's European perspective to be the driver behind reforms, if we want Turkey's European perspective to be an incentive for discussing human rights and freedom of the press, we should urge a number of countries to rethink their position on these 2 chapters. I also want to stress the significance of political dialogue with Turkey, as well as Turkey's significance for the Arab region. I deplore that There is no balanced approach in the reports on the Cyprus issue. We are not to expect unilateral concessions on the part of Turkey, yet a number of countries, particularly the Republic of Cyprus, should be reminded of their commitments. They should be reminded of what the Council called them to do, namely to stop the political isolation of Turkish Cypriots. I think that is a viable political solution. Thank you.
Mr. Kazak, do you accept the blue card from Mr. Belder?
Microphone, please. You're a member of the Liberal group, the ALDE. So you believe in freedom of expression, unlimited freedom of expression. So, Mr. Kazak, can you tell me what is the appeal of Turkey given to the Arab world at the moment in the light of ongoing events and in the question of freedom of opinion and freedom of expression? Irrespective of what the Arabic world or the Arab world thinks about the Turkish model, my question is, can you say what is the role of Turkey as a model to the Arab world? What has that done up to now? What has it achieved?
I believe that the answer to your question, Mr. Belder, is contained in the paragraphs of the draft report by Ms. Ruijten. And it also part of the statements made by the Commission. The role of Turkey as an inspirer to democratic changes in Northern Africa is quite clear to everyone. I do believe you will agree with me that this model of a very civilized democratic country has inspired not one but many countries in the region, and I do believe that this role should be supported by the European Union, and Turkey should continue to be this mediator between the EU and these countries, so that they have a democratic model of governance. Thank you.
There is another blue card from... Please.
Obviously, this was in translation. You talked about the fact that Turkey was being demanded to make unilateral concessions, and you accused Cyprus of not living up to its commitments, was the word in translation, towards the Turkish citizens, Turkish Cypriots in the north of the island. Well, is it not true that Turkey made a commitment under the Ankara protocols to allow Cypriot registered vessels to dock at Turkish ports, and that commitment is, or allowed it to come to pass? So who is actually in breach of their commitments, Turkey or the Republic of Cyprus here?
Dear Mr. Tannock, I do agree with you. I do agree that when fulfilling their commitments, neither Turkey nor the European Union really live up to these commitments. Yet the draft report solely accuses Turkey of not living up to its commitments. Again, no criticism is voiced in the report concerning the fact that the European Union is not living up to its commitments. These are commitments that were enshrined in a document as early as in 2004. A referendum was held on settling the disputes under the so-called Kofi Annan plan. That is what I mean in saying not living up to commitments.
There is another blue card from Mr. Stoyanon. Do you accept? Yes, please.
Благодаря. Господин Казак, бих искал да ви попитам, не бихте ли желали да...
Thank you. Mr. Kazak, I have the following question. Why not declare a conflict of interest on your parts, bearing in mind that both you and your brother were sponsored by the Turkish government when you were being educated in France at the Sorbonne?
Господин Стоянов, това е клевета за пореден път, която изричате. Аз не съм завършил в...
Dear colleagues, this is one more slander on your part. I was not sponsored by the Turkish government when I was studying in France. I was studying on a scholarship granted by the French government. Therefore, what you have just said is mere slander.
The last one, blue card from Mr. Mavronikolaos. Do you accept? Do you accept? So please.
Ευχαριστώ κύριε Πρόεδρε. Μπορείτε κύριε Καζάκ να μας πείτε ένα...
Thank you. Mr. Kazak, please tell me what any measure that Turkey has taken, a measure to show goodwill after 40 years of occupation, after an occupation by many settlers. Just tell me one single thing, just one that Turkey has done to show goodwill.
Mr. Mavronikolaos, I would only mention the fact that the number of the soldiers was reduced significantly since 1974. At the same time, you note that under no commitment related to European quotas or related to the Green Line or removing any obstacles to Cypriots, there has been any advance. So I do believe both parties, and I would stress it again, both parties should put a lot of effort, a lot of goodwill is needed to achieve a good and sustainable solution, and the confrontation should be stopped. Thank you.
Thank you. We resume the debate with Ms. Keller, 1.5 minutes.
Thanks. I would also like to congratulate the Rapporteur, Madame Oomen-Ruijten, for her good work. Indeed, there's many problems still remaining in Turkey. Just to mention a few: the press freedom, minority rights, especially those of transgender people and homosexuals, environment, Kurdish question, etc. A lot of problems unsolved. Not at least Cyprus, of course, where we need a sustainable settlement reached on the island of Cyprus and an end to the isolation of the northern part. Solving those issues will be very beneficial for Turkey and its citizens. The accession process is an important incentive for change and reform in Turkey, as it is as well in other enlargement countries. But this will only be an incentive as long as we are clear in our commitment to welcome Turkey as soon as Turkey fulfills the Copenhagen criteria, just as we've done with other countries as well. And our most important tool for change and reform are the accession negotiations. It is not understandable why we deprive ourselves of this tool by not opening the chapters on justice and fundamental rights as well as on home affairs, in which a lot of the problems that I just mentioned, a lot of the concerns that have been raised in this House are included. So indeed we should open them as soon as possible. We should be sincere in our wish to help Turkey to solve those problems, and therefore open chapters 23 and 24 as soon as possible, and then welcome Turkey to the EU as soon as the criteria are fulfilled. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Keller. Now, Mr. Van Dalen, for 1 minute. President, the film Fethi, which is popular in Turkey, has a dark edge to it. The Dutch newspaper NRC Handelsblad quoted a cinema goer who said it's a shame that in 1953 they didn't murder all Christians because we would no longer have any bother with them. We can see this mirrored in the course taken by Erdogan. He becomes closer and closer with Hamas. He supports the Arab Spring, which in some countries in North Africa has now led to the expulsion of Israeli ambassadors. And we're seeing now that Aramean monasteries are also being expropriated. Erdogan is just... and his AKP party is extending his power base, and we're seeing a dangerous cocktail of Turkish nationalism and Islamism, and so to bring in Turkey into the EU would be a mistake of historical proportions. Good neighbourship in neighbourhood is more than enough.
Meine Damen und Herren, Beifalls- oder Missfalls...
Ladies and gentlemen, it's not appropriate for there to be applause or otherwise from the gallery. Mr. Klute is next.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say that those paragraphs that deal with justice and reform of the Constitution in Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten's report, I think are very good, so I'd like to congratulate her on those parts of the report. But I'd just like to note that when it comes to the situation of the Kurds in Turkey, that perhaps there isn't enough about this in the report. We know that there are over hundreds of journalists. We know that there are over 1,000 Kurds that are imprisoned or they're in jail, people who belong to the Kurdish party. There are even MPs amongst those who are in jail at the moment. And I don't know whether there is any attempt being made seriously to solve the conflict between the Kurds and Turkey. And I think we should say a little more in more serious terms about this in the report. We have tabled certain amendments for the vote tomorrow, and I would very much hope that we can have a majority behind those amendments. And I think we have to express this more clearly, as I've pointed out. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Klute. Es folgt Herr...
Thank you very much, Mr. Klute. Mr. Sandrakos, 1 minute.
Thank you. Yes, there's no doubt that Turkey, as indeed the report says, has a developed economy. It has a military role as a factor for stability in its part of the world. So let's hope that the messages in this report will be heard by Turkey. However, Turkey is not really doing what it should if it is to develop its European dimension. It continues with the occupation of a part of an EU member state. Now, in violation of a UN resolution. And then it is threatening that if no solution is found of the kind that we want for Cyprus, it will cut off any communication with the forthcoming Cypriot presidency of the EU. So I think that that is an obvious violation, and we cannot have any proper kind of relationship with Turkey.
President, Commissioner, Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten's report is a good thing to the extent that it highlights the lack of freedom of expression and media freedom in Turkey. But I think that one gets the impression that the EU and this Parliament really is in denial when it comes to Turkey. Despite the new constitution, Turkey is actually moving away from Europe more and more, and the new constitution really won't change the fact that Prime Minister Erdogan is becoming more and more authoritarian in his rule. And moving away from Europe means the country is becoming more and more Islamized, and you can see that what Turkey's view is of the Armenian genocide and the arrogant behaviour of Turkey vis-à-vis the incoming Cypriot presidency. I think overall you can say that Turkey is moving away from Europe, but it still is happy to take EU money in form of aid. And I think we should recognise, therefore, that the EU is not a European country and should never be part of the European Union. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Mölzer.
Thank you, Mr. Mölzer. Now Mr. Wałęsa for 1.5 minutes.
Dziękuję, panie przewodniczący. Szanowni państwo, w tym roku...
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to focus on one issue that was also mentioned in the report itself. I'm talking about lawsuits against journalists that are being arrested based on, for instance, anti-terrorist law, because allegedly they involve into propaganda, terrorist-related propaganda, but in truth they just broach subjects that are not convenient for the authorities. The truth is, it definitely impacts the freedom of expression and freedom of speech based on Articles 6 and 7 of a relevant act, it's enough if they publish information about a demonstration that was held by the Kurds, and they go to prison. That's why we should make sure that all lawsuits against journalists are transparent, fair, and conducted in adequate conditions. Unfortunately, until now we have not had relevant or adequate data concerning the number of such cases opened against journalists. The work on the new criminal code is in the pipeline in Turkey, but I'm afraid that they won't do away with this act, and it won't be enough anyway. They have to change the approach to the law itself. I think that even new formulations in new laws won't change anything if relevant acts are not treated seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wałęsa. Now, Mr. Howitt, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. I was prevented with other international observers this year from observing the KCK trials in Diyarbakir. And had we been let through the door, we would have seen prosecutions taking place without the defence present and with the use of the Kurdish mother tongue prohibited. So, Commissioner, it is right that we keep the pressure up for judicial reforms to show full respect for human rights. The release of jailed journalists Nedim Sena and Ahmed Seek this month shows that our criticisms are effective. Indeed, I was honoured recently to meet the daughter of murdered Armenian origin journalist Hrant Dink to speak in support of her appeal against the finding that this was not an organised crime, but to hear from Etienne Machupian, the proprietor of his newspaper at the time, that popular revulsion to his murder has eased attitudes in Turkey towards the Armenian question. President, I have nothing but praise, on the other hand, for the help Turkey has given to the 17,000 Syrian refugees who have crossed into its borders, and I join with the Commissioner in welcoming the constitutional debate, but ask him to join with me in asking that the submissions published on the website to be republished, from which they were abruptly taken off.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. There is a question from the Earl of Dartmouth. Mr. Howard. Mr. Howard, do you accept?
Yes. Has Mr. Howard ever considered the impact on his constituents of giving 90 million Turkish citizens, including an oppressed Kurdish minority of approximately 15 million, the absolute right to live, work and settle in the United Kingdom, which will be the consequence of admitting Turkey as a member of the European Union? Have you ever considered that?
A young Turkey with a growing skilled workforce and growing business can improve the prosperity not just for that country but for my country and my constituency. And the honourable member knows a few things about losing elections. Perhaps if Nicolas Sarkozy loses the election on May the 6th, there will be a fairer hearing for Turkey in the European Union.
Thank you very much, Mr. Howard. No, we need to move on. Mrs. Jäätteenmäki is next.
Thank you. The women of Turkey not long ago enjoyed great success in a volleyball competition. Turkey, the Turkish journalists said that no, they shouldn't be allowed to do that, but some of these the journalists that reported on it have been sent to jail. Now there is a lot that needs to be put right in Turkey, but despite all this, we have to say that when it comes to foreign policy, Turkey has been a positive, has been a force for good in its own region. If you look at the developments, and hopefully it will be able to cooperate constructively with the EU in the future, and they can help one another. This is important apart from the question of negotiations on enlargement. I think that it's a very good report. The time now is right to open negotiations on 23 and 24.
Thank you, Mrs. Jätenmäki. Now, Mrs. Yannakoudakis, for 1 minute.
Sorry, I think my colleague would like catch the eye, Charles Tannock.
Frau Kollegin Jäten.
Mrs. Jätenmäki, there is a blue card from Mr. Tannock. Do you accept? Mr. Tannock.
Mrs. Yatamaki, again it was in translation, but you said that Turkey had been a force for good in the work it's done in its region. Well, how then do you account for the fact that it's kept the border and an embargo closed with peaceful democratic Armenia for 20 years for no other reason than the fact that it sides with its cousins in Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh? How can you justify a boycott on a country like Armenia purely because of your solidarity with some other country? This is absolutely unparalleled any other place of the world. So what good is it doing in terms of keeping its border shut with Armenia, please?
Frau Kollegin Jätenmäki.
Yes, Turkey does have problems with Armenia, but we've got to bear in mind that, you know, there's been a lot of development there, and in all of that, Turkey has always acted very constructively.
Vielen Dank. Es folgt.
Thank you very much. Now, Fontana, for 1 minute.
Ich bitte um Entschuldigung. Ich bitte um Entschuldigung.
I do apologise.
Frau Kollegin Yannakoudakis, ich habe es...
Mrs. Yannakoudakis, I had already crossed you off my list, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Turkey is still lagging behind when it comes to equality between men and women. The rigid role which women play in Turkish society means a lower participation by women in the workplace, politics and civil society. Worse still, attacks against women are commonplace and authorities are too lenient on the perpetrators of gender-based violence. More women's shelters are needed in order to protect the vulnerable. Turkey must work harder to eradicate the practice of honour killings, with dozens of Turkish women murdered each year. I also call on Turkey to criminalise forced marriages. Turkish women are still less educated than their male counterparts, and there needs to be a special focus on rural women, especially with regards to literacy. 3 million rural Turkish women remain illiterate. Kurdish women in particular are disadvantaged by the double burden of being a woman and Kurds. I call on the Commission to put women's rights to the forefront of negotiations with Turkey.
Thank you, Mrs. Yannakoudakis. Mr. Fontana, 1 minute.
Thank you. My dear colleagues, in this chamber we often hear about Turkey's accession to the European Union, and yet year after year very little progress is made. In fact, sometimes we're going backwards. Look at what the Turkish Foreign Minister said about the Cypriot presidency. That in itself should be enough for Commission and Parliament, and indeed for Council, to decide that the time has come to say that's enough of attempts to bring Turkey closer to Europe. We've got to look at what path we're going down with this country, or we want to go down with this country, which is of course of strategic importance to Europe and has very important trade relations too. Which carries a risk to our basic values and principles. So let's take another look at this accession policy. Don't forget, under this policy we are handing out money, and that might even be used to put journalists in jail and invade Cyprus. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fontana. Mr. Stoyanov is next. 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. I have often addressed plenary on Turkey and the related problems. My colleagues have tried to enumerate all the breaches committed by Turkey, yet there are so many breaches that they can hardly be enumerated. I mean breaches of democratic principles and human rights. Last week, our esteemed colleague José Bové from the Greens and another 3 colleagues sent me a letter. They asked me to sign this letter, a letter to the Secretary General of the Council.
This letter calls on the Council to suspend the accession process of Turkey. Bearing in mind this letter, what is the point of talking about negotiations with Turkey about Turkey's accession? Finally, allow me to address European citizens. Dear European citizens, would you like a country to accede to the European Union that has committed several genocides, a country that is not ashamed of that, a country that is even proud of it?
Thank you, Mr. Stoyanov. Now for a minute and a half, Mrs. Yanakou.
Yes, thank you, President. I'd like to congratulate Mrs. Maria Oomen-Ruijten for a very exhaustive and complete progress report. And when it comes to the whole perspective of accession of Turkey to the European Union, we have to see just what Turkey's approach is going to be, because we know there are certain problems when it comes to Turkey, for example, the way they understand democracy and the way they perceive freedom of religion, freedom of expression. And then, of course, there is a need for constitutional reform so that they have a modern model of democracy. Then, of course, there's their foreign affairs policy, the way they're going to be treating with various threats and risks. And we want them to stop violating the territory, the space of other countries. We know that Turkey has expressed an interest in becoming a member of the European Union, but they have to respect certain conditions. And what about migration flows through Turkey? And at the moment they're not respecting certain agreements in this field, so of course this does throw up a very many question marks. Obviously, if Turkey is willing to take the necessary measures, if they're willing to meet the necessary requirements and want to have both feet in Europe, then they have to meet certain obligations.
My dear colleagues, we, the Social Democrats, have made it abundantly clear that we stick to a European prospect for Turkey. We still do. But I'm afraid we have to say that at the moment the policy of the Erdogan government is not to our liking at all. They seem to be working fine with the economy, but there are less positive developments there in terms of internal policy, domestic policy. Journalists are being thrown in jail and the freedom of opinion is being encroached upon. We now have the threat to freeze relations with the Cypriot presidency. This is completely unacceptable. Reform and democratisation must continue, and Turkey is a partner country at the moment with which the EU is conducting accession negotiations on the basis of its own decisions and based on our values too. We have got to stick to our guns, and I think this is a very good report, but he's been cut up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kreisel-Dorfler. Now, Ms. Schaake.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. Today we call for a renewed boost in the EU-Turkish relations and to open the negotiation chapters on the most essential issues now, the chapters on fundamental freedoms, justice and the rule of law. Our emphasis on these key issues prompts the Turkish authorities, the government first and foremost, to ensure the rule of law is upheld. While we are open to cooperation in relation to the Middle East security challenges, we strongly condemn the abuse of anti-terrorism laws. It is, after all, NATO's second largest army, of which leadership, a significant portion now, faces the most serious charges of committing terrorist activities or of plotting a coup. It is essential for Turkey, its role in NATO and its relation with the EU that both process and outcomes of these trials are fairly conducted and that suspects get a due process. The same goes for the high numbers of journalists imprisoned, as many colleagues have mentioned. The climate of fear and mistrust in institutions in Turkey is undermining its potential to be a leader in a changing world, and we urge the Turkish government to take its responsibilities.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Schaak.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Schaake. Now the Earl of Dartmouth for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, Turkey's Prime Minister Erdogan has described UN sanctions against Iran as, and I quote, a mistake. Since March last year, Turkey, Iran, Iraq and Syria have issued tourist visas valid for those 4 countries together. Turkey, of course, has a customs union with the EU, but Turkey also has a customs union with the 5 Turkic-speaking countries of Central Asia. The inconvenient truth is that Turkey is a regional power of the Middle East, and this is because of the actuality. Turkey is an Asian country, moreover one that does not tolerate meaningful dissent. Turkey should not even be considered for membership of the European Union, and it certainly should not be receiving almost €1 billion a year in pre-accession funding.
Thank you. Now Mr. Klaas for 1 minute. Thank you, President. How long are we going to carry on putting together so-called progress reports on Turkey, which actually contain no progress at all? This is the 6th or the 7th since 2005, and I'm wondering whether in Turkey or in Europe there is still anybody who actually takes these documents seriously. We all know that Turkey does not make the grade to start negotiations on accession, and things are just going from bad to worse. At the moment there are over 100 people in prison in Turkey just because of their point of view, and having said that in public, there are professors, officials, civil servants, journalists and elected politicians in prison. Is that the sort of country that we want to see in the European Union? Turkey's position on Cyprus is also a scandal, as well as its foreign policy, which is becoming more and more far away from Europe. So let us finally pull the plug on this process and once and for all decide that Europe needs to stay European.
Thank
you, Mr. Klaas. Now Mrs. Theoharos, 1.5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, President. I think it's quite clear that when it comes to respecting human rights, the situation in Turkey means that it would be impossible for Turkey to become a member of the European Union. They're not going to be able to achieve this step until they have stopped threatening Cyprus, until they've put a stop to their occupation of Cyprus. It's totally out of the question for both Cyprus and the European Union, because we know that human rights are being violated in Cyprus, the rights of the Turkish Cypriots and the Greek Cypriots as well. And I think it would have been useful for a number of us to hear this cry for help from the Cypriot inhabitants here in the European Parliament. But I'd like to thank the Rapporteur for the work and effort she's put into the progress report. But unfortunately, Turkey is still not showing many signs of goodwill. If Turkey wishes to continue down the path of accession and wishes to open up new chapters, then they are going to have to meet the criteria, the requirements set by the Council and the Court of Human Rights, and they're going to have to properly accept the community acquis. They do send out messages of goodwill that they intend to do so, but then what happens when we hold out a hand to them? They respond by threatening Cyprus, and we are going to find ourselves in a bit of a dead-end street, especially if they do not comply with the UN resolution.
Thank you, Mrs. Theocharos. There is a question from Mrs. Boskurt. So do you accept the question?
Do you accept the question? Frau Kollegin Boskurt.
Mrs. Boskurt.
Thank you. Yes, a very simple question I have. I'll wait until the lady gets her headset on. Our Greek Cypriot colleagues have mentioned several times today what the Turkish Cypriots want, what they find, what they think their wishes are. Could you explain to me why we don't have any Turkish Cypriot colleagues represented here in this Parliament so they can tell us for themselves what they think?
Γιατί τους απαγορεύει ο τουρκικός στρατός κατοχής?
Thank you. Well, it's partly because the Turkish occupying army has prevented them from doing so. And this has been shown on a number of occasions, and we've seen this from statements that have been made. And here in the European Parliament, every time they have an opportunity to come to the European Parliament, to come to Brussels, if they do have an invitation, then they have to come along, obviously, with a Cyprus passport.
Vielen Dank, Frau.
Thank you, Mrs. Theoharous. Now, in the future, I will no longer be granting any blue cards for colleagues who go over and beyond their speaking time. Mrs. Mavro-Nicolas is next.
40 χρόνια συμπληρώνονται συνομιλιών για τη...
For many years now, we've been looking for a solution to the Cyprus question. Nothing's happened. Nothing happens, no real solution has happened. Turkey hasn't done anything at all. 50,000 Turkish soldiers are still on North Cypriot soil. We know what is happening with Famagusta. So Nicosia too is a victim. The city of Nicosia is a victim of the situation. We keep hearing criticism of Israel's occupation or settlements in Palestinian territories, but the exact same thing is happening in the north of Cyprus. 1 million Turks have settled in the north of Cyprus, and 10 years on, we're still hearing that there's no solution and we can't put a stop to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mavro-Nicolas. Are you ready to take a question from Mr. Kazak? Mr. Kazak.
Thank you, President. I have a question to Mr. Mavro-Nicolas. How did Cyprus support the finding of a sustainable solution in the last couple of years? Could you give me initiatives, something concrete that would lead to such a solution? And why are you against the Commission's proposal for direct trade contacts with the north of Cyprus? Thank you.
We're not against that. No, not at all. The Legal Affairs Committee suggested that these contacts should take place, and we are certainly in favour of trade contacts, but on a proper legal basis. But, you know, we don't want to recognise an occupation. We don't recognise any country's right to occupy part of another country. And in Turkey there is no goodwill. Look at the statement made by the Prime Minister.
Mr. Allen, for 1 minute. Mr. Allen, for 1 minute, please.
When I read this resolution, or when I read it rather, I wondered what Europe were talking about and what Turkey was talking about. If you regard Europe as a merely geographical entity, you should realise that Turkey is not Europe, since 97% of Turkish land is in Asia. The secular Turkey founded by Ataturk in 1924 no longer exists. Instead of that, we now have an Islamic regime that has imposed itself, and its Prime Minister, Mr. Erdogan, in 1998 was found guilty of incitement to religious hatred, who said the mosques are our barracks and the faithful of Islam are our soldiers. He is an extremist. According to Erdogan, Israel is a terrorist state and Hamas an organisation worthy of support.
Thank you very much, Mr. Allen. Mrs. Schnieber-Jastram for 1 minute. Yes, thank you, President. And I'd also like to thank Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten for her report, because it just goes to show what an important role Turkey plays for the EU, not only in economic terms but also in political terms, because they are an important partner in the region of the world, linking up to Africa and Asia. But despite the progress that they've made, they still have to catch up. There's still a lot to do. Imprisoned journalists, the Kurdish minority, and I think this is quite clear. So I think we have to make efforts together with the Turkish government, together with Turkish society, and come up with solutions to problems that exist, and also give our support to Turkey in their reform. I'm quite shocked at the way in which some of the colleagues are questioning some elementary fundamental rights. The freedom of exercising religion and the right of freedom of expression. Finally, a request for the Commission. We know that Commissioner Fule is going to be taking the floor, but obviously this very positive agenda with Turkey is going to have to be submitted as quickly as possible and developed as quickly as possible. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Schnieber-Jastram. Now Mrs. Boskurt.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Fule, Minister Wammen, Turkey's importance keeps increasing. Turkey's economy is growing and Turkey is becoming a regional and global power. Europe and Turkey need each other more than ever. But ironically, the accession negotiations have entered a stalemate. The Commission has no real leverage on important issues due to the blocked chapters. The positive agenda is important to keep supporting the reforms, but if we want real changes, we must support the opening of chapters 23 and 24. The report we will vote tomorrow is important because it recognises these issues and it gives support to the positive agenda. It supports the reforms, but also says that there are still reforms that need to be carried out, especially on freedom of speech and press freedom. We are concerned about the wide margin of appreciation allowed by the anti-terror law. We are concerned about the arrested journalists and those working under the threat of being arrested. But I'm also concerned about the attacks in Europe on Turkish press offices and ask for investigations to be carried out in Europe to find the perpetrators. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Boskurt. Would you take a question from the Earl of Dartmouth?
Peter.
Go ahead.
Used the phrase in your speech that Turkey is a growing economy and a regional power. Well, the same could be said of South Korea. Why do these two facts, if they are facts, justify political union with Turkey?
Het is een feit dat er onderhandelingen gaan.
It's a fact that negotiations are underway, and given that that's true, I think it's important to look at what's important for the European Union and what's important for Turkey. And the fact you're against accession is your problem, but I think it's important for us to look at how we can negotiate further in a good way, and that's it.
Yes, thank you very much, Mrs. Boskurt. Mr. Svensson for 1 minute.
Thank
you very much, President. I congratulate Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten for an excellent report. One can wonder whether this report is being written to pay tribute to the long road that Turkey still has left before it achieves EU membership, or whether the report is being written for other reasons. I think that we need to be more honest in this debate. We need to answer the question as to whether we really want to see Turkey as a member state of the EU or not. I think that's an important question for us to ask. Personally speaking, I think that we absolutely should do everything we can to make sure that Turkey eventually does become a member state. I think that Turkey needs the EU less than the EU needs Turkey, in fact. Now, it's true that there's a long way to go before they are ready, but I do think we should work out whether we want Turkey to go in that direction or not. Turkey is a great power and can act as one.
Thank you very much, Mr. Svensson. Mr. Arlacchi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I support this resolution because I'm in favour of a full EU membership of Turkey and because I am convinced that the accession process of this country should be completed as soon as possible. I heard many objections to this process and I believe many of them are well grounded, but I believe also that these objections are overshadowed by three facts. First, the contribution of Turkey to the stability of the world economy. Its economic growth, along with the performance of the BRICS, averted the transformation of the financial crisis in Europe and USA after 2008 into a genuine catastrophe. The second fact is the strengthening of the global peace generated by Turkey's democratization process and related zero-problem foreign policy. There has been a huge change of course of Turkish foreign policy in the right direction that is positively affecting all East-West relationship. The third is the quality of Turkish social policies. In just 6 years, from 2003 to 2009, the country reduced its poverty rate by an astonishing 36%. And as a socialist and democrat, we particularly appreciate this achievement.
Thank you, Mr. Arlacchi. And we now have Mr. Koumoutsakos for 1 minute. Mr. Tannock, I made it quite clear that I was anybody who I had to cut off before the time, they wouldn't get any extra questions. So, Mr. Koumoutsakos.
Thank you, my dear colleagues. On February 23rd, the Turkish Minister of Defence announced in the Turkish Parliament that they had purchased 100 speedboats for the next 4 years, over the next 4 years, at the cost of 15 billion euros. Just a month later, they were out there doing exploration in Greek territorial waters. And then the Turkish frigate, entered Greek territorial waters and came very close to Athens. Now this frigate, which entered Greek territorial waters, as I say, quite illegally, forced the Greek forces, naval forces and air forces too, to go into action. And you're wondering why we spend so much on defence. What can you say to us, given that this situation we're in with Turkey?
Thank you very much. Now Mrs. Gomes for 1 minute. Thank you very much. As the rapporteur has pointed out, Turkey has made a lot of progress, but there's still a lot of work to do. And I think, obviously, they're going to have to try and accept some of the more fundamental values of the European Union, with a better share out of power and greater participation of the Turkish civil society. There has to be respect of minorities in Turkey, including the Kurds, but also a greater acceptance of women. There has to be freedom of expression, freedom of the media. And these are all rights and values that continue to be violated, and we know that a number of people are languishing in jail. These journalists who are accused of being terrorists, they're taken to special courts, and there's no guarantee of independence of the justice system. Obviously, over the next half of this year, Turkey is going to gain ever more importance because of the Cyprus presidency. And obviously, we have to try and do everything possible to make sure that they do respect their obligations. Mrs. Gomes, would you allow a question from our colleague Papadopoulou? Sorry, it was not a question from Mrs. Papadopoulou, so perhaps I can hand the floor to Mr. Stoloyan now for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. I would like to thank the Rapporteur for the balanced text that we have reached. Turkey's place is within the European Union. We have every right that during negotiations with Turkey we should urge them to fully respect European values, but I believe that we should be as demanding, and I'm talking about certain member states, concerning the real reasons they invoke each year in order to block the negotiations with Turkey. I hope that the future EU presidency of Cyprus shall be a pleasant surprise as far as these negotiations are concerned. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Stolojan. And Mr. Lisek for 1 minute.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie przewodniczący, panie komisarz.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. I want to thank and commend Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten for her great balanced report, which is showing what has been happening in positive terms, as well as the challenges that we are still facing. Because we have to face one simple political fact, which is that we have already started negotiations with Turkey with a view to accession. The EU is negotiating with Turkey, which means that both France, Germany and Cyprus are negotiating as well. As far as I remember, in the past, all accession negotiations would lead to an accession finally. So there is this basic question: do we want Turkey in the EU? And we have to answer this question. Now I want to ask my Cypriot friends and colleagues. Look at it from the point of view of history. Germany and Poland, we used to be enemies. Now we are great friends.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Lisek. Well, this brings us on to the Catch the Eye procedure. Ms. Mazowiecka, you have the floor.
Catch the Eye.
Dziękuję, panie przewodniczący. Gratuluję pani sprawozdawcy.
Thank you so much. I would like to congratulate the rapporteur, Madame Oomen-Ruijten, especially that I think we've wasted many years waiting on before giving any solutions for Turkey. I think this stagnation only gives us more problems, as evoked here in the room. There are no solutions. I think that the action plan, however, would give us hope that finally we will try to bring Turkey closer to the EU, closer to better standards and conflict resolution. As Mr. Commissioner has mentioned, there are many things that we have in common, so maybe we should strive to work on the areas that would get us closer. We should definitely try to give new incentives for Turkey, especially when it comes to problem solution. I believe in democracy, and I think only this can give us adequate standards for Turkish citizens, but also it can allow us to resolve certain problems that you all have mentioned in the debate.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Jasłowiecka.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Jasłowiecka. Mrs. Papadopoulou.
President. Συνάδελφοι, το Ευρωπαϊκό Κοινοβούλιο.
Thank you. My dear colleagues, the European Parliament, we cannot turn a blind eye to violations of human rights in Cyprus by Turkey. The European Union does not have the right to accept threats from candidate countries, threats against a country that is about to take on the presidency. The Oomen-Ruijten report speaks about protocol. Again, I'm talking about Cyprus, a failure to abide by the protocol, and the absence of sanctions against Turkey is dangerous. We know about Famagusta. 2 chapters. We're going to open 2 chapters while this is going on. Turkey is preparing to set up colonies in the Famagusta area, a violation of the United Nations resolution.
Mr. Feigl.
Herr Kollege Weigel.
Mr. Weigel, please.
Very much. Morebitno članstvo
possible membership of Turkey in the EU is something which splits this House in two parts. This spirit will continue as long as we say whether we want Turkey in the EU, whether we can afford it, whether we don't want it. This state of mind will continue if all Cypriot members of the Parliament insist on taking part in each and every debate on Turkey. I believe that the main criteria for accepting a country into EU is the acceptance of acquis communautaire, and before negotiations start, this criterion cannot be applied. I think it is only right that we accuse the prosecution of journalists and intellectuals in Turkey. However, we have to see Turkey as a future valuable member of the EU.
Thank you, Mr. Weigel. Mrs. Miranda.
Thank you, President. We heard here some opinions about the violation of human rights and the no separation of powers. We heard here some opinions also about the no freedom of expression in Turkey. What are Turkey doing for the separation of powers? What are Turkey doing for the use of constitutional drafting process as a chance for developing a more realistic and democratic identity, allowing for the full recognition of all ethnic groups, including Kurds, Lath, Jerses, Roma, Alevi, Syriacs, Arabs, Greeks, Armenians, Jews, and others. What are doing Turkey to consider a process of decentralization and meaningful local government in order to meet the demands of the diverse segment of its population?
Thank you, Mrs. Miranda. And Mr. Posselt to conclude the Catch the Eye procedure.
President, Mr. Weigel did not correctly actually quote the treaty. The main criterion as to whether a country can accede is whether it's a European country, and Turkey is not a European country. Now, I think we need to have a strong federal Europe, and if Turkey becomes a full member of the European Union, we will not be strong and federal. We need to find a different form of integration. I also want our policy towards Turkey to be honest. One of your predecessors, Mr. Fule, said, well, don't worry, Mr. Posselt, Turkey will never become a member of the EU. Nevertheless, in public, he spoke in favour of Turkish membership, and the Turks are aware of this sort of double standards. We need a clear, honest partnership with Turkey, and that will stabilise the country. Anything else will destabilise Turkey and also the EU.
Thank you, Mr. Posselt. Now, Commissioner Fule, you have the floor, sir.
Herr Kommissar Fule.
Commissioner Fule.
Mr. President, honourable members, Minister, the Turkish accession process is to move forward. It's urgent now for Turkey to comply with its obligation of full implementation of the additional protocol to the association agreement and to make progress towards normalisation of bilateral relations with the Republic of Cyprus. The same Cyprus who is to become soon proud, and I'm confident, an effective presidency of the Council for the benefit of the European Union and to the benefit of the interests of the European Union. Now, it has been a fascinating debate. I'm only could express pity at not that many people who were so outspoken during the debate sort of waited until the end of this debate. Because I would like to share a couple of thoughts here. Number one, what really surprised me is, maybe I was occasionally, not tentative enough. No one really has mentioned the comprehensive talks on Cyprus and tomorrow's important meeting and the roadmap as put forward by the United Nations Secretary General and implemented by Special Representative Alexander Downer. Is it a sign of this House sort of being content with the status quo? I hope not. And I hope that the energy which I have sensed in your discussion will be turned, in supporting the two leaders meeting tomorrow, addressing the core issues and allowing Downer to recommend the Secretary General to go for the finalization of the process and not to leave it for a plan B, because I have a news for you. There is no plan B. As for the reform process, looking at progress achieved in the past years, we can conclude that Turkey is moving forward, even if progress sometimes too slow or uneven. A lot of taboos removed, a lot of questions now debated. But hey, who could have imagined Turkey restituting properties to non-Muslim religious communities? The latest example being the title deeds of the Greek primary school of Galata in Istanbul. Third point. The story is about my predecessor and about double standards. I have only one standard. I have only one standard, and it is to be sincere and truthful, both in open meetings and in meetings behind the closed door. Despite my age, I have enough of experience in diplomacy to be aware that this is the worst enemy of the success. If you talk something in an open arena and something different behind the closed door, I will never, ever do it. What this House should not be split on, I believe, personally, is the question or the issue that there are actually clear rules of the games at the end of this process. And what are these rules of the games? The Accession Treaty, which clearly reflects Turkey, in this case, approximating fully with the European Union acquis, as stipulating by all negotiating chapters. Number two, the consensus of all member states and the procedure to ratify this approval. And third, also, an impact study showing clearly the impact of in this case, the Turkish membership, and also showing clearly to all member states and all of us that we're going to talk about the manageable process to the benefit of both the European Union and Turkey. Those are the rules of the game. And I hope the House is not split on this particular issue. I hope also that this House is not going to split on the issue that the best way to achieve this, the best way to help Turkey to strengthen democracy is actually the accession process. Anyone in this House believe that building the big wall between us and Turkey would improve the very fundamental rights many of you refer to? Because if so, I don't believe it. Huh? The accession process is the only way how to make European Union benchmark of the reforms in Turkey. The accession process is not to compromise on our values. The accession process is to make is for Turkey to embrace the values the European Union is so firmly based on. Why should this House be split on this process? Because interestingly enough in this debate I have not heard one single idea how to do it better and more efficiently to the benefit of Turkish people. I have not heard it. And I'm afraid I will not hear it in the future. Now coming to particularities, but important one. As regards a paragraph in the resolution on civil-military relations, I would like to agree that the formulation of the sentence on the integrity of the armed forces could be improved in order to clarify more precisely what is meant and take away any ambiguity that might arise. The next point, I think my point 5. At the start of the debate, I have also expressed my concerns about the respect for freedom of expression in general. This is something I will continue to raise with my counterparts. I will not miss any opportunity in Turkey and will continue to exchange views with civil society. And let me stress in the conclusion something I really feel personally very strongly about. The European Union should continue to encourage the reform process in Turkey. Our leverage and influence in Turkey will become all the more credible and stronger if our commitments, as outlined in 2005 when we launched the accession negotiation, remain unambiguous. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Fule. And in order to wind up the debate, I'd now like to hand the floor to Mr. Fule for the Council.
Herr Formand, ærede medlemmer, Kommissær Fule.
President, members, Commissioner Fule. European Union enlargement, historically speaking, has been one of the major success stories of European politics. I think that the attraction the European Union is seen with by many other countries has led those countries to carry out major reforms. We share values and we trade with many other countries, and that has brought peace and prosperity to the four corners of Europe. Now, those are the values that the Commissioner mentioned in his very strong speech, and I'm looking forward with a great deal of impatience to having a constructive dialogue with the European Parliament. Now, not just, of course, about the accession of Turkey to the European Union, but also on the subject of the other candidate countries. I think we all know that accession is a complicated and difficult process, and it places demands on those countries who choose to become members of the European Union, even if negotiations with Turkey are not easy at all, as today's debate has shown. Having negotiations is the best way to make Turkey take economic and political reforms. As has been said in this House, it's fundamental for the interests of the European Union and the interests of Turkey to continue down this road. The Danish presidency, with member states and the European Parliament, and also with the Commission, will do what it can to support this process. But today, let me be clear, the final decision will be taken by Turkey. We can only make progress if Turkey makes progress in its own reforms. And that's work which should not be underestimated, and it needs a real commitment and political will to be shown. Now, the Danish presidency side, well, we will be following things very closely, and we will reinforce the process where possible. Now, by way of conclusion, I'd just like to say how important the European Parliament is in the broader political process. Debates such as the one held today should help the people of Europe and the people of Turkey to support this joint project. It's an important one which should not be underestimated, and it's one which needs to have more attention paid to it, and there the European Parliament has a very important role to play. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I've received one motion for resolution to wind up this debate, and that will be tomorrow at 11:30. The debate is closed. Thank you all. I have a brief announcement on the proposal for appointments to the Special Committee on Organised Crime, Corruption and Money Laundering, which have been published and are available on the Séance en Direct website. The deadline for tabling amendments to these proposals is 0900 tomorrow, Thursday. The vote will be at 11:30 tomorrow. We now move to the next item on the agenda.